Did humans conquer the planet because we are uniquely brilliant at believing fairy tales, or because we are mercifully ruthless at destroying them?
You know, that is the defining question of our species. It really dictates how we view our past and, more importantly, how we build our future.
Yeah. And today on The Deep Dive, we are basically taking a sledgehammer to some of the most comforting narratives in popular science. We're going to explore this profound difference between, falling for a seductive fiction and actually engaging in rigorous, brutal myth-busting.
Right. And our guide for this is this really fascinating collection of essays, research notes, and lectures by Dr. Owen Gilbert.
Yeah, he's an evolutionary biologist proposing a massive paradigm shift. Like, he is challenging the absolute bedrock of traditional Neo-Darwinism.
For sure. He's really shaking the foundations.
Yeah. So my goal today for you, our listener, trying to navigate this increasingly complex world, is to help you figure out how to spot dogmatic fictions because, they appear even when they're coming from the highest levels of academia. We want to understand the true mechanics of how innovation actually takes over.
To set the stage for that, we kind of have to look at the dominant narratives sweeping through popular culture right now.
Oh, definitely.
There is this massive trend suggesting that human success is entirely built on our capacity for collective imagination.
Right, which means we have to talk about Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens. It is the ultimate elephant in the room here.
Oh, absolutely. You literally cannot walk through an airport without seeing a copy of it.
Exactly. And Harari's core argument is that Homo sapiens' ultimate superpower was our ability to believe in shared fictions. He groups things like ancient mythology, money, the concept of a limited liability company, capitalism. He puts all of that under the umbrella of imagined realities.
Yeah, his premise is that because we can all collectively hallucinate these concepts, we can cooperate flexibly in massive numbers.
And on a surface level, that feels incredibly profound, doesn't it?
It does. You look at a stock certificate or a corporate logo and you think, well, this only has power because millions of us agree to pretend it does.
Right.
But when Dr. Gilbert analyzes this thesis, he spots this glaring historical contradiction. He points out that Harari is asking the right question, like, why did humans come to dominate the planet? But he lands on a conclusion that completely ignores the actual mechanics of progress.
Because, if you look closely at human history, our biggest, most world-altering leaps forward didn't come from blindly accepting myths.
No, not at all.
They came from violently tearing them down.
Exactly. Look at the scientific revolution. The turning points that actually shifted the trajectory of human health and technology, they were not moments of collective harmonious belief.
They are the exact opposite, right?
Yeah, they were isolated moments of profound myth-busting. It was, an astronomer realizing the Earth is not the center of the universe, despite literally the entire global power structure believing it was.
Wow, yeah.
Or a physician realizing that diseases are caused by microscopic, invisible organisms, rather than divine punishment or, bad air. Every single one of these breakthroughs required an individual to look at the deeply held, universally shared fiction of their era and just destroy it.
Okay, let's unpack the economic side of Harari's argument for a second, because this is where Gilbert's critique really clicked for me. Harari claims capitalism is just another fiction we all buy into, and that collective belief is what makes it work.
Right, the shared illusion of value.
But wait a minute. People pursued their self-interest and believed in massive shared fictions under feudalism, too.
Oh, totally. Feudal lords absolutely believed in the divine right of kings.
Right. They believed in the value of their estates. They invested in mercenaries. They cooperated to build these massive castles. But feudalism didn't give us the printing press or the steam engine or modern medicine.
No, it didn't.
And look at the Soviet command economy. That was an enormous shared fiction, cooperating on a scale never before seen, yet it eventually stagnated technologically.
Right. And the distinction Gilbert makes here is between cooperation that is bound by tradition and cooperation that breaks tradition. Under almost all economic systems throughout history, humans have cooperated. We are social primates. That's just a given.
Yeah, that's just baseline human behavior.
Exactly. But the specific engine of the Industrial Revolution, the scientific method, market economics, was that they structurally incentivized myth-busting. They actually rewarded the destruction of the old way of doing things.
I have this analogy in my head. Listening to Harari's theory is like believing humanity's superpower is sitting around playing a massive globally shared game of Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, I like that.
Like, we all agree on the rules, we all pretend the dragons are real, and our ability to maintain that shared imagination is our strength. But Gilbert is pointing out that our actual superpower is that we are the players who occasionally, stop the game, walk out of the tavern, test the actual physics of the real world, and figure out how to build an internal combustion engine.
That framing captures the hazard perfectly. Believing in fictions, if left unchecked by physical reality, just leads to stasis. Gilbert uses the Amish as a prime example of this.
Oh, right, the Amish.
Yeah, here is a community that is perfectly bound by shared fictions and traditions.
Yeah.
Their cooperation is legendary, right? I mean, they can raise a barn in a single day.
Which is incredible.
It is. But their specific belief system structurally restricts them from the kind of myth-busting innovation that leads to, say, the microchip or the sequencing of the human genome. The true superpower isn't just cooperation. It is cooperating to overcome the constraints of inherited tradition.
So, if myth-busting is the actual engine of human progress, why does society devour the fiction narrative? Like, why does a book saying we just imagined our way to the top sell tens of millions of copies?
Well, because the fiction narrative is incredibly comforting.
Yeah.
It frames all of human progress as just a quirky feature of our psychology. It masks this cold, hard, often brutal reality that progress requires the constant, uncomfortable destruction of cherished ideas.
It's hard to look at the destruction part.
Exactly. Psychologically much easier to tell ourselves that we collectively imagined a better world, rather than admitting we had to violently tear down centuries of dogma, burn a few astronomers at the stake, and forcefully reshape our understanding of reality just to get here.
It's totally the path of least resistance, which makes me wonder, if we are naturally inclined to seek out comforting narratives, how easily do we slip back into believing fictions today? Like, we aren't immune just because we live in the 21st century.
But we aren't immune at all. In fact, Gilbert argues we need to look at the very institution designed to protect us from fictions.
You mean the modern scientific academic establishment?
Yes. To understand what is happening in universities right now, we kind of have to bring in Thomas Kuhn and his concept of normal science.
Okay, I am somewhat familiar with Kuhn, but break down normal science for someone listening who maybe hasn't read The Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
Sure. So Kuhn observed that science doesn't always operate as a series of constant breakthroughs. Most of the time, it operates in a phase of what he called normal science.
And what does that look like?
In this phase, scientists do not question the underlying paradigm of their field. They just accept the ruling dogma, they read the standard textbooks, and they spend their careers solving tiny, intricate puzzles within that established framework.
Just staying in their lane.
Right. And Kuhn actually argued this was somewhat necessary for efficiency. I mean, you can't reinvent the scientific method every Tuesday, right? You need a stable framework to gather data.
But if they are just solving tiny puzzles and never questioning the big picture, isn't that just a sophisticated version of playing Dungeons and Dragons? Like they're just rolling dice within a rule book someone else wrote.
That was exactly the fear of another massive philosopher of science, Karl Popper.
Ah, right.
While Kuhn saw normal science as a practical reality, Popper looked at it and saw a terrifying vulnerability. He argued that the uncritical normal scientist was basically a victim of indoctrination.
Wow, indoctrination. That's a strong word for science.
He didn't pull punches. Popper warned that if an entire academic field becomes dominated by this puzzle-solving mindset, it breeds intellectual bigotry and intolerance. It threatens the very foundation of free critical thought.
This brings us to a concept in Gilbert's notes that I found incredibly provocative, and that's the last scientist. He draws this from Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of the last man.
Yeah, Nietzsche's last man is a philosophical archetype of a person who desires only comfort, warmth, and security. This person takes no risks, dreams no great dreams, and merely follows the herd because it's safe.
Just coasting.
Exactly. And Gilbert maps this psychology directly onto modern academia to describe the last scientist.
So what does a last scientist look like in a modern university? Because I'm picturing someone in a lab coat who is supposed to be, discovering the cure for cancer or something.
Right, but the last scientist is terrified of bold risks because risks threaten their grant funding and their tenure track. They might outwardly speak the language of objective discovery, but their primary goal is protecting their reputation.
So it's about job security.
Very much so. They hide their underlying theories from actual rigorous refutation. They form internal networks to police major journals, using peer review not to ensure scientific accuracy, but as a gatekeeping mechanism to silence any alternative paradigm that threatens their established worldview.
Wait, but peer review is fundamentally supposed to catch errors and elevate the truth, isn't it?
Well, in theory, yes. But the last scientist uses it as a shield. They will look at a completely novel, disruptive idea and dismiss it with two contradictory arguments. They'll say it is either old and already known, or they will say it is unfamiliar and therefore wrong.
A catch-22.
Exactly. And they do this without ever actually engaging with the empirical evidence presented.
It sounds so theoretical, but the sources include a literal social media experiment that Gilbert ran, which proves this dynamic in real time. Like, he published a paper challenging traditional Neo-Darwinism and proposing his new theory, and then he just sat back and watched how two fundamentally opposed online communities reacted to it.
The contrast he documented is staggering. The two groups were writers for the Discovery Institute who are creationists and mainstream evolutionists participating in university-level biodiversity groups.
Now, based on everything society tells us, you would assume the mainstream evolutionists would be the objective, rigorous evaluators, and the creationists would be the dogmatic ideologues. Right?
That is absolutely the assumption, but the exact opposite occurred.
The creationists actually downloaded the paper.
Yes.
They read it. And the normal scientists, the evolutionists.
Oh, it's honestly embarrassing to read the quotes. They reacted with pure dogma.
Yeah, Gilbert screen-grabbed comments like, I may need to read the paper to be scrupulously fair, but this summary reads like gibberish.
Right. Another said, my opinion, wacko.
Another literally wrote, I was immediately suspicious of it without citing a single scientific reason.
They behave like an immune system attacking a foreign pathogen. They didn't read the work because it threatened the sacred text of their paradigm.
This is the ultimate illustration of belief in a fiction versus the mindset of myth-busting, isn't it?
Totally. The evolutionists in this scenario have been trained by years of normal science to view their specific Neo-Darwinian framework as an unquestionable doctrine. They reacted with the hostility of religious zealots.
It completely flips the script on how we view authority. I mean, is the modern academic system with its hyper-specialization, its intense pressure to secure funding, and its brutal, anonymous peer review gatekeeping accidentally breeding a global army of last scientists?
That's the fear.
Are we structurally discouraging the exact kind of disruptive myth-busting that actually drives human progress?
It is a profound systemic risk. If a scientific field becomes just another community defending its shared fictions to maintain its social status and funding streams, it ceases to be a science. It becomes a priesthood.
Okay, so if the biological establishment is acting like a priesthood, protecting a sacred dogma, what exactly is the dogma? What is the specific biological fiction they are uncritically accepting?
The fiction they are clinging to is a concept called teleology.
Teleology?
Yeah, it's a philosophical trap that goes all the way back to Aristotle. Simply put, teleology is the error of looking at a complex trait's apparent design, or its current purpose, and assuming that this final purpose is the cause of its existence in the first place.
I think we need a concrete analogy for this because it's a tricky cognitive illusion.
Sure.
So, say I'm walking down the street after a massive rainstorm, and I see a puddle of water perfectly filling a pothole. I stop and marvel, wow, look at how brilliantly that pothole was intelligently designed to hold that exact shape and volume of water.
Yes, that's perfect. Before Darwin, this was the standard view of biology.
Like a bird has wings so that it can fly.
Exactly. The future goal of flying was the final cause that pulled the wings into existence, either engineered by a conscious creator or driven by some mystical law of progress built into nature.
Right.
Darwin's massive, world-shaking breakthrough was supposedly destroying that teleological illusion. He proposed that wings evolve through a blind, short-sighted process of natural selection, tinkering with immediate local advantages, not with any ultimate goal of flight in mind.
But Gilbert's entire point is that modern evolutionary biologists have slipped right back into the pothole illusion. They claim to be rigorous Darwinians, but they constantly use teleological thinking.
They really do.
The sources highlight a very public example of this, involving a prominent researcher named Michael Levin, appearing on the Lex Fridman podcast.
Yes, and this is crucial because Lex Fridman has a massive, highly educated audience, so this is what the public is absorbing as cutting-edge science.
It's mainstream.
Very mainstream. On the podcast, Michael Levin argued that evolution works toward what he called long-term attractors, such as optimizing for biomass. He explicitly stated that evolution does not just adapt a frog to its immediate froggy environment. It has an inherent drive toward ultimate complex goals.
And Levin used the example of a slime mold, Phaserum polycephalum, to prove this foresight. Now, for you listening, slime molds are these bizarre, single-celled organisms that can merge together and grow to massive sizes.
They're fascinating creatures.
Yeah, so Levin described a scenario where you take a slime mold, sever a piece of it, and place a food source nearby. According to Levin, a standard selfish agent would just race for the food to monopolize it for itself.
Right, that would be the expected blind reaction.
But the severed piece doesn't do that. It turns around and fuses back to the main body first. Therefore, Levin concludes the slime mold is negotiating a long-term benefit over a short-term one. He is granting it foresight.
And this is exactly where Gilbert completely dismantles the argument. He points out that Levin's conclusion is teleological nonsense, driven by a failure to understand the absolute basics of evolutionary mechanics.
How so?
Well, Levin is treating the severed piece of slime mold as a separate agent with separate competing interests from the main body. But from a genetic standpoint, there are no separate interests.
They're clones.
They are identical clones. They share the exact same genome.
Right. Gilbert explains they fuse back together not because they have some mystical long-term foresight about optimizing biomass, but because of a completely blind, hardwired mechanism called kin recognition.
Exactly.
Let's break down the mechanics of that. Fusing with a genetically identical clone mate provides immediate selfish genetic benefits. You instantly gain a massive size advantage against other non-related competitors in the area.
Right. Safety in numbers, basically.
You can share chemical resources. And most importantly, you avoid wasting energy in a pointless competition with a piece of yourself. There is no negotiation happening. It's a mechanism built by millions of years of local, immediate payoffs.
To drive this point home even further, the sources bring up another biological example that is frankly shocking, and that's the Melipona bees.
Oh, the bee example is horrific.
It really is. These bees utterly destroy the teleological idea that evolution possesses foresight or works toward the ultimate good of the colony.
Explain what happens in these hives, because it blew my mind.
Okay, so in a typical honeybee species, queens are fed a special substance called royal jelly, which makes them grow much larger than the sterile worker bees. The thighs difference acts as a clear signal, but in the genus Melipona, things are different.
How different?
The queens and the workers are exactly the same size during their larval development. Now think about this from a selfish genetic perspective. Every single female larva has a massive biological incentive to become a reproductive queen rather than a sterile worker, because only the queen gets to pass on her genes.
Right, so because the workers can't distinguish who is supposed to be the queen based on size, the larvae essentially stage a genetic rebellion against the good of the hive.
Exactly. Because of this blind, selfish drive, the colony ends up producing a massive excess of queens, far more than the hive actually needs or can sustainably support.
Wow.
So what is the outcome of this optimized biological system? The adult workers swiftly and mercilessly massacre the vast majority of these newly emerged queens.
They just tear them apart?
They do. If evolution was teleological, if it possessed foresight and engineered systems for the ultimate harmonious good of the colony, it would never design such a chaotic, wasteful, and gruesome mechanism.
It's completely counterproductive from a design standpoint.
Yes, it exists this way because evolution only optimizes locally, based on immediate genetic incentives, even when it leads to a horrific bloodbath at the macro level.
This raises a massive question for me. If the evidence against foresight is this clear, why is it so tempting for brilliant people scientists with PhDs running massive labs to fall into the teleological trap? Why is the Pothole Illusion so inescapable?
Because it is a profound cognitive bias hardwired into our species. Human brains evolved to recognize patterns, intent, and purpose. We are tool makers.
We build things with a goal.
Exactly. When we build a tool, we build it with a final goal in mind. We forge a hammer to hit nails. Because we are forward-thinking engineers by nature, we look at the breathtaking complexity of biological life, the aerodynamic perfection of a wing, or the complex behavior of a slime mold, and our brains simply short-circuit.
We project ourselves onto it.
We cannot help but project our own goal-oriented engineering mindset onto a blind historical process. Teleology is the ultimate comforting fiction because it imposes human logic onto the chaotic, terrifying reality of nature.
Okay, so if teleology is a cognitive illusion, and Darwin's whole legacy was supposedly destroying this illusion, how did the entire field of modern evolutionary biology get trapped in it again? Did they just forget?
They didn't forget. They were forced into a psychological corner by history and politics.
Really?
Yeah, to understand this cover-up, we have to trace the error all the way back to Charles Darwin himself. Because, as brilliant as he was, Darwin embedded a massive, unresolvable contradiction in the origin of species. He presented two completely conflicting messages about how natural selection operates.
Okay, let's lay out these two messages clearly. What was message one?
Message one is the rigorous scientific mechanism we just discussed. Natural selection acts blindly without any foresight. It only adapts organisms to their immediate local environment. It tinkers.
Right.
It does not guarantee that an organism gets better or more complex in any absolute sense. It just ensures they are marginally better than their immediate competitors in that specific local moment. Gilbert refers to this as comparative progress.
It's the survival of the just good enough to not die today.
Precisely. But then Darwin also explicitly promoted message two.
Which was?
Natural selection inevitably leads to the conquer of inferior forms by superior ones. He claimed it leads to an overall advance in the organization of life over deep time. It creates absolute long-term progress.
But those are mutually exclusive. Like, he's saying the process is completely blind, local, and short-sighted, but also that it inevitably builds a magnificent upward ascending staircase of ultimate superiority. You can't have both. Did anyone point this out to him?
Oh, his closest confidants caught the error immediately.
Really?
Yeah, Charles Lyell, the famous geologist who heavily influenced Darwin, wrote to him right after reading the proofs of the book. Lyell urged Darwin to modestly limit the pretensions of selection.
Modestly limit the pretensions. That's a very polite 19th century way of saying you overreached.
It is. He essentially told Charles, your mechanism explains local, minor adaptations beautifully, but it completely fails to explain the grand upward sweep of life from single cells to mammals.
And didn't Alfred Russel Wallace have issues with it too? I mean, he's the guy who co-discovered natural selection independently of Darwin.
Yes, Wallace had the exact same realization. Wallace looked at human beings, our massive brain capacity, our hands tailored for fine manipulation, our anatomical hardware for complex speech, and realized that natural selection, a force driven strictly by the immediate desperate need to survive, couldn't possibly explain this sheer fortuitous combination of massive advancements.
It's just too much complexity too fast.
Exactly. Wallace concluded there must be another law, another undiscovered force at play to explain this level of macroevolution.
This is the historical mystery, though. If Darwin's own allies saw this glaring contradiction in the 1860s, why didn't the scientific community isolate the problem and fix it? Why did they let the contradiction become the foundation of modern biology?
From the sources, it reads like a political thriller. The cover-up was cemented during a period in the 20th century called the Modern Synthesis, roughly between 1937 and 1959.
Okay, what happened during the Modern Synthesis?
During this period, scientists like Theodosius Dozansky and G. Ledyard Stebbins were undertaking the massive task of unifying the new science of genetics with Darwinian evolution. But they were operating in a highly charged, dangerous political environment.
Dangerous how?
They were terrified of the growing influence of creationism in America. Their primary political goal was to ensure that evolution, and strictly evolution, was taught in public science classrooms.
Ah, okay. And just to be clear, for you listening, we are not taking a stance on the politics or the debates between creationism and evolution here. We are purely reporting on the historical dynamics described in Dr. Gilbert's notes to show how this specific academic environment shaped the theories we use today.
Right, absolutely. So to achieve that political victory, they needed to present a unified, impenetrable scientific front. They felt they couldn't afford to admit to the public or to politicians that Darwin's foundational theory had a massive, unexplained hole in it regarding long-term absolute progress.
Because if they showed weakness...
Exactly. If they admitted that natural selection had limits, they feared the creationists would drive a wedge through that loophole and say, see? Science can't explain the big leaps. God must have done the rest.
So to keep the creationists out of the classroom, the architects of the modern synthesis made a fateful, unscientific decision. They simply accepted both of Darwin's contradictory messages as absolute truth.
Yep.
They claimed that microevolution, the blind, short-sighted tinkering of genetics, could just be mathematically multiplied over millions of years to perfectly explain macroevolution, the grand trends of progress.
And Gilbert argues that this political compromise created a schizophrenic state in modern biology. Biologists will stand at a podium and vehemently defend the idea that evolution is blind and non-teleological. But then they will turn around, go to their labs, and use complex mathematical models like adaptive landscapes that implicitly assume species are being magnetically pulled toward ultimate peaks of optimal design.
They speak out of both sides of their mouths.
Gilbert connects this directly to a psychological concept called the double bind, originally coined by the anthropologist and psychologist Gregory Bateson.
Break down the psychology of the double bind for us, because it explains the hostility we talked about earlier.
Sure. Bateson defined a double bind as a situation where a subject, often a child, receives conflicting, contradictory messages from a powerful authority figure they cannot escape.
Like what?
Imagine a parent who verbally says, "I love you," but physically recoils in disgust when the child approaches. The child cannot resolve the logical contradiction, and they cannot leave the family unit. This leads to severe cognitive distress, paralysis, and Bateson even argued it could trigger schizophrenia.
And Gilbert applies this to the evolutionary biologists of the 20th century. They were handed two deeply contradictory messages from the ultimate authority figure of their field, Charles Darwin.
Right.
They couldn't reject Darwin without destroying their careers, and because of the political threat of creationism, they couldn't openly resolve the contradiction, so they internalized the cognitive dissonance.
By shutting down critical inquiry to present a united front, they effectively mandated Kuhn's normal science. They traded the rigorous, uncomfortable process of myth-busting for a comforting, defensible fiction. They built the fortress, but they locked themselves inside with a paradox.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've torn down the fiction. We've established that natural selection alone cannot explain the grand, progressive sweep of life on Earth. But that leaves a massive, gaping hole in our understanding of reality.
It does.
If natural selection isn't the sole driver of macroevolution, what is? What actually explains how we got from single-celled sludge to complex mammals building internet podcasts? What is the actual mechanism?
This is the core of Gilbert's paradigm shift, the theory of natural reward.
Let's get into it.
This is where we replace the contradiction with a new, robust, logically consistent framework. Gilbert proposes that the history of life is not driven by one deterministic force, but by two distinct interacting forces. Natural selection, which we are familiar with, and a completely new force he calls natural reward. To understand how they interact, we have to look at the economic environments in which they operate.
Let's start with natural selection. Gilbert refers to natural selection as the inventor.
Yes. Natural selection operates strictly under conditions of resource limitation. This is the classic struggle for existence, first proposed by the economist Thomas Malthus.
The idea that populations will always outgrow their food supply, leading to a brutal competition for scraps.
Exactly. When an environment is cramped, when there isn't enough food, water, or physical space to go around, organisms compete fiercely with their immediate neighbors.
And under these cramped, starving conditions, you mentioned earlier that natural selection tinkers via allele frequency changes. For someone who hasn't taken a biology class in a decade, what exactly is changing in this cramped garage?
Think of a population's gene pool, like a massive deck of playing cards. An allele is just a specific variant of a gene, like the aces in the deck. If an environment gets slightly colder, the animals with the thicker fur allele might survive slightly longer and have more babies.
Makes sense.
Over generations, the proportion of thick fur cards in the deck increases. That is an allele frequency change. It is completely blind. It is just reacting to the immediate pressure of the cold.
It's not trying to invent a perfect winter coat for the future. It's just trying to survive Tuesday.
Exactly. And because it's only reacting to immediate, highly specific local pressures, it produces incredibly idiosyncratic, weird traits.
Right.
It's why one lineage of mammals, trapped in Australia, blind tinkers its way into becoming a platypus with a duckbill and venomous spurs. Meanwhile, another lineage in Africa blind tinkers its way into becoming a primate with a modified larynx and opposable thumbs.
So natural selection doesn't know it's building a human brain to eventually split the atom.
Not at all.
It's just trying to keep the primate from starving in the canopy. Natural selection only provides comparative progress. You're just marginally better than the platypus next to you in your specific limited niche.
Okay, so if natural selection is the blind, tinkering inventor stuck in a cramped garage making weird gadgets to survive, what is natural reward? Natural reward is the entrepreneur. And it operates under a completely inverted set of conditions. Resource abundance.
Resource abundance.
This leads not to a struggle for existence, but to what Gilbert calls the struggle for supremacy.
We are so culturally trained to think of nature as a constant, starving Malthusian battle. What does resource abundance actually look like in the wild?
It happens when a massive, untapped ecological zone suddenly becomes available. When the blind, random inventions of natural selection happen to produce a trait that allows an organism to access that massive, unused resource, natural reward kicks in.
Now, what does that look like?
The organism is naturally rewarded with what economists call an incumbent advantage. It experiences a rapid, explosive population expansion and achieves ecological dominance. This sudden scaling is what drives absolute progress.
Let's look at the hard data for this, starting with a legendary study in biology. The E. coli long-term evolution experiment run by Richard Lenski. Walk us through the mechanics of this, because it perfectly illustrates the two forces.
Lenski's team took a single strain of E. coli bacteria and placed them in 12 different petri dishes. They tracked them every single day for decades, eventually passing tens of thousands of generations.
Which is mind-boggling.
Yeah, they periodically froze samples, so they literally had a fossil record in the freezer. Now, the environment they created was highly specific. The bacteria were given only a tiny limited amount of glucose to eat each day. This forced a Malthusian struggle, resource limitation.
So natural selection is running the show here.
Correct. For about 30,000 generations, natural selection just tinkered blindly. The bacteria made tiny comparative adjustments to their allele frequencies to become slightly more efficient at gobbling up the limited glucose.
Okay, but there's a twist, right?
Big twist. The fluid in the petri dish was also packed with a chemical called citrate. The E. coli couldn't digest citrate in the presence of oxygen. It was an entirely untapped, massive reservoir of energy sitting right next to them.
An environment of potential resource abundance?
Yes. And then, around generation 31,500, something incredible happened in just one of the 12 populations.
What happened?
Through a complex series of historically contingent, random genetic mutations, blind tinkering one lineage invented the ability to metabolize the citrate.
They figured out how to unlock the massive, untouched reservoir of food.
And the moment they did, natural reward took over. That specific lineage exploded in population, completely dominating the petri dish. They achieved supremacy.
Wow.
Now, here's why this solves the macroevolution problem. The transitional tinkering steps that led to that citrate-eating ability happened while the lineage was incredibly rare, fighting for scraps of glucose in the background.
Ah, I see.
If you were an alien paleontologist looking at the fossil record of this petri dish, you wouldn't see the slow, gradual buildup of the trait. You would just see the sudden, explosive, out-of-nowhere appearance of a dominant citrate-eating superbug.
It solves the missing link problem. Natural reward causes such rapid population expansion that it gives the illusion of a sudden evolutionary leap, what biologists call a saltation, in the fossil record.
Exactly.
The slow tinkering happens in the shadows, and the reward happens violently on the main stage. And we see this exact dynamic on a planetary scale with the dinosaurs and the mammals.
We do. For tens of millions of years, mammals existed alongside dinosaurs. But the dinosaurs held the incumbent advantage. They had already diversified and captured all the major ecological niches.
The mammals couldn't beat a T-Rex or a Triceratops in direct head-to-head competition for resources.
Right, so natural selection was just tinkering with the mammals in the shadows. It kept them small, made them nocturnal, gave them fur, and developed warm blood just to help them survive the cold, dinosaur-dominated night.
But then, an asteroid the size of Mount Everest hits the Yucatan Peninsula.
The ultimate ecological disruptor. The asteroid wipes out the non-avian dinosaurs. Suddenly, the Earth is transformed into an environment of massive resource abundance for whatever manages to survive the impact winter.
The ecological niches are entirely empty. The constraints are gone.
And those weird blind inventions the mammals acquired in the shadows, warm blood, specialized teeth, larger brain-to-body ratios, suddenly became the exact tools needed to unlock the entire planet.
Natural reward kicked in.
It did. The mammals raced out of the burrows to innovate, rapidly expanding into every available niche, growing to the size of elephants and whales, and capturing the global monopoly.
Which brings us back to an analogy about technology that maps perfectly onto this biological reality. I was thinking about the early days of personal computing. Natural selection is Steve Wozniak sitting in a cramped garage in the 1970s, blindly tinkering with soldering irons and silicon chips. He doesn't have a grand teleological vision of revolutionizing global commerce. He's just solving immediate local engineering puzzles because he finds it intellectually stimulating.
He's just seeing if it works.
Exactly. He's building a circuit board just to see if it works. That's the blind inventor. But Wozniak's bare circuit board by itself doesn't change the world. It doesn't scale.
It requires an entrepreneur to recognize the environment.
Exactly. Natural reward is Steve Jobs. Jobs walks into the garage, looks at the blind invention, and realizes, wait, this little circuit board can tap into a massive, completely unexploited resource zone, a personal computer on every single desk in every home in the world.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
Jobs takes the local invention and scales it into an environment of absolute resource abundance. And once Apple or Microsoft captures that massive market, they lock it down. I want to ask you about the mechanics of that lockout effect because Gilbert talks about the incumbent advantage. How does an organism or a company prevent competitors from rising up once the environment is full?
Once an organism rapidly expands into an empty resource zone and diversifies, it physically fills up the available ecological space.
Okay, yeah.
Think about why Amazon dominates e-commerce. It isn't necessarily because they have the best underlying code today. It's because they got there first, built the massive physical infrastructure of warehouses, and captured the consumer habits.
It's just hard to displace them.
Right. An evolutionary lineage that radiates into a new environment prevents competitors from taking hold simply by being there, consuming the calories, and specializing in every niche. It's a race for the market, not just a struggle within the market.
Oh, I like that distinction.
The first one to scale gets rewarded with a monopoly, and they hold it until an asteroid or a disruptive technology resets the board.
Okay, Gilbert's theory seems to elegantly solve the glaring contradictions that have plagued evolutionary biology for a century. It bridges the gap between micro and macro. But any true mythbuster must be able to withstand critical pushback, right? You can't just tear down a century of dogma without fiercely defending your new map of reality.
And the pushback against Gilbert from the academic establishment is intense. Interestingly, the criticism isn't usually about the physical evidence, like the petri dishes or the fossils.
What's it about then?
The resistance is primarily because he is changing the language, the definitions, and the metaphors that biologists are comfortable with. The sources include a fascinating, detailed debate with a critic named Jake.
Yes, Jake essentially acts as the voice of the classic Neo-Darwinian defense. I want to play devil's advocate for Jake here. Jake argues that natural reward isn't actually a new deterministic force. He claims it's just natural selection happening in a different environment, an environment with more grass, so to speak.
Okay.
Furthermore, Jake argues that true science should be about precise, literal mathematical definitions, and that Gilbert is wrong to introduce metaphors like entrepreneurship or monopolies to describe biological reality.
It's a very common, almost reflexive critique from within normal science. The desire for literal mathematical precision is strong. But Gilbert's defense is an absolute masterclass because he exposes the foundational hypocrisy of modern biology. He points out that the entire mathematical edifice of modern Neo-Darwinism is already built on a massive, highly flawed metaphor.
Are you talking about R.A. Fisher? Because the sources mention he redefined the core metric of evolution.
Yes, R.A. Fisher in the 1930s. Fisher was one of the architects of the modern synthesis. He needed to make evolution mathematically computable.
Which is hard to do.
Very. Now, Darwin originally used the word fitness to mean adaptedness, how exquisitely well an organism's complex physical traits suited its specific physical environment.
Okay, adaptedness.
But adaptedness is incredibly complex. You can't easily put the aerodynamic efficiency of a wing into an equation. So, Fisher took a shortcut. He mathematically redefined fitness to mean simply net reproductive success. He stripped away the physical traits and just said, count the number of surviving offspring.
Which makes the math incredibly clean and easy to run on a computer, but it completely changes the meaning of physical reality.
Entirely. As Gilbert points out, an organism can be exquisitely adapted to its environment, perfectly camouflaged, highly efficient at hunting, metabolically flawless, and still get randomly struck by lightning and fail to reproduce.
Right.
Equating physical adaptedness with numerical reproductive success is a mathematical metaphor. It takes a complex physical reality and substitutes it with a simplified number.
So everyone is already using metaphors.
Yes. That metaphor undergirds all of modern population genetics. So for evolutionists to attack Gilbert for using economic metaphors to describe macroevolution is intellectually hypocritical. They're already swimming in metaphors.
And beyond just exposing the hypocrisy, Gilbert argues that expecting any scientific metaphor to be perfectly 100% literal is just absurd. It fundamentally misunderstands how humans learn. He uses the hydraulic metaphor for electricity to explain this.
It's a brilliant comparison. When we teach students about electricity, we almost universally compare it to water flowing through a plumbing system.
Right.
We say voltage is like water pressure and current is like the flow rate of the water. It's a highly useful metaphor that allows a beginner to grasp the mechanics and build a basic circuit. But if you push that metaphor too far into the literal physics, it completely breaks down.
Right, because there is no water equivalent to an electromagnetic field. Electricity doesn't actually flow inside the copper wire the way water flows inside a pipe. The energy actually propagates through the electromagnetic field around the wire.
Exactly. But just because the water metaphor isn't perfectly literally true at the quantum level doesn't mean we throw it out. We use it because it's a highly functional map for a certain level of reality.
The math analogy is so powerful here. Complaining that Gilbert's metaphor of the entrepreneur isn't perfectly literal is like looking at a topographical map of the Rocky Mountains and yelling, "This map is a lie." A mountain isn't just a squiggly contour line on a flat piece of paper. Let me speak to the cartographer.
Right. A map deliberately simplifies reality to make it navigable. If a map was as complex and detailed as the actual mountain, it would be a mountain, and it would be useless to a hiker.
Exactly.
Darwin's metaphor of the Malthusian struggle for existence gave us a vital map to navigate microevolution, how allele frequencies change within a cramped population. But it completely fails to map the grand long-term trends. It cannot map the leaps.
And that's where natural reward comes in.
Yes. Gilbert's metaphor of natural reward provides the missing map. It gives us the framework to navigate macroevolution. It explains the sudden expansions, the capturing of monopolies, and the absolute progress that blind natural selection simply cannot account for.
This forces us to look at the nuances of language, specifically when we casually throw around the phrase evolution is a fact, because, as Gilbert points out, that phrase is often weaponized by last scientists to shut down any critical debate.
Oh, absolutely.
If I'm hearing this for the first time, I might be thinking, wait, is this guy saying evolution isn't real?
We need to be incredibly precise with our definitions here. Is descent with modification a fact? Yes, absolutely. The physical evidence that human beings share a common ancestor with other primates, or that modern birds descended from theropod dinosaurs, is overwhelming.
The historical reality of it is solid.
Yes, that historical aspect of evolution is a fact. But is natural selection a complete explanation for the apparent design and progress of life? No, that is an underdeveloped theory.
Okay, I see the distinction.
And Darwin's specific idea that life naturally, inevitably progresses towards superior forms through blind struggle. That was an incomplete theory. Natural reward is the missing half of the equation that finally completes it.
This changes everything. If we accept natural reward, how does it actually alter the way a curious student or an entrepreneur or anyone listening right now looks at the world? Does understanding that we are the product of blind inventions suddenly colliding with abundant markets change how we view human potential?
I think it shifts your entire psychological baseline.
How so?
If you're deeply conditioned by the old Neo-Darwinian fiction, the idea that progress only emerges from a brutal, zero-sum, Malthusian struggle for limited resources, you will view the entire world through a lens of scarcity.
You're always fighting for scraps.
Right. You will believe that in order for you to win, someone else must inherently lose. You will spend your energy fighting over fractions of a percent of a shrinking pie.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. But if you deeply understand natural reward, you realize that the most massive paradigm-shifting leaps in the history of life didn't come from fighting over the crumbs. They came from someone or some organism inventing a new tool that accessed a completely new, untapped resource.
So it changes the focus.
It shifts your focus from bitter competition within a confined space to the boundless, expansive potential of innovation.
Let's synthesize the journey we've gone on today for you listening. We started by taking a sledgehammer to Yuval Noah Harari's comforting, popular narrative that humans dominate the planet because we are brilliant at playing make-believe and believing in shared fictions.
We did.
We looked at the historical mechanics and proved instead that our true power, the actual engine of human prosperity, lies in our ability to be ruthless mythbusters.
We then turned the lens on the scientific establishment itself. We watched as evolutionary biology, terrified of political threats and desperate to present a united front, became trapped in its own dogmatic normal science.
Last scientists.
Right. We saw how the peer review system breeds last scientists who defend the status quo, and how brilliant minds resurrected the ghost of teleology, projecting human foresight and engineering goals onto the blind, tinkering processes of nature.
And finally, we explored how breaking through that century of dogma reveals Dr. Owen Gilbert's theory of natural reward. We saw a reality where blind local invention meets the vast entrepreneurial struggle for supremacy.
We saw how the E. coli bacteria unlocked the citrate reservoir and how the mammals raced out of the shadows to inherit the Earth after the asteroid cleared the board.
It is a profound philosophical shift. We move from viewing life as a desperate, cramped struggle merely to survive Tuesday to viewing it as a relentless race to innovate and expand into the void.
It really is an incredible way to reframe everything.
And that leaves us with a final physical reality to mull over as you go about your day. For centuries, Malthusian thinking has convinced humanity that we are trapped. It tells us that the resources on this planet are strictly mathematically limited, that the global pie is shrinking, and that our future is just a bleak, managed decline where we fight our neighbors for whatever is left.
That's a very prevalent worldview.
It is. That fiction breeds massive cultural anxiety, it breeds zero-sum politics, and it breeds a paralyzing fear of the future.
But the physical mechanics of the universe shatter that Malthusian fiction. The sheer volume of energy pouring down on our planet from our sun every single hour, combined with the incredibly imminent potential of human-engineered fusion power, represents an effectively infinite resource abundance.
We aren't actually running out.
No, on a cosmic scale, we are not running out of energy. We are merely limited by our current technological capacity to capture it.
Exactly. If the 4 billion year history of life on Earth tells us anything, it is that the universe is not a closed, starving system. It is a vast, open expanse holding massive untapped reservoirs just waiting to naturally reward the next great invention. The resources are there. The field is open.
It's just waiting.
So the question you have to ask yourself as you navigate your own life, your career, and the ideas you choose to accept is this. Are you going to spend your time locked in a bitter struggle fighting over a limited pie? Or are you going to bust the myth, step out of the game, and invent the tool that unlocks the whole bakery?